Hello everybody, welcome, and you'll need a pen and paper for this session. So I'm going to give you a minute countdown so you can go and get yourselves sorted out, okay? And please make sure that you can hear the video and see the video and see me and hear me. So this countdown is also to make sure that our technology works okay. So here we are, 1 minute countdown to get your pen and paper ready. Hello everybody and welcome, good afternoon and welcome across the miles from Southend-on-Sea, my little town on the edge of England. Well, I know I told you last week that we were having storms and floods, and yes we have, but my little patch of England has been very, very lucky. On Sunday I was out in the sunshine all day. It was beautiful, and yesterday morning I went out early in the morning, about 7:15, and the sun was only just coming up, and it was a misty morning, and I went out to play golf, and it was absolutely beautiful. So now you know one of my hobbies. I don't play golf well, and I only play 9 holes, and I don't score, but I have a friend who likes to go out early in the morning because of the peace and the quiet, the stillness, and you can hear all the birds sing, and watching the sun, come up across the lakes or the trees, absolutely gorgeous. So I had a big smile in my heart yesterday. Okay, so what are we doing today? Well, it's our workshop and it's designing problem statements. So thank you to Professor Nabil for putting our material together. I've added some things, and I hope you like them. And I have tuned in for a 5-minute break in the middle of this workshop, and just before the break we have a video to watch, and it's well worth watching, but it is a long one. So when I come to that, I will say make yourselves comfortable and sit tight. Okay, so let's have a recap on what we've been doing so far. So in a review of Lecture 2, we examined the meaning and importance of empathy in staff and customer relations, and why it's important in understanding client needs. And we focused on how to encourage our clients to engage with and immerse themselves in our products and perhaps our solutions. We reviewed the 5 modes of design thinking, and we reviewed the 5 W's of questions. So that's the who, what, where, when and why. And we reviewed empathy mapping. And if you recall, empathy mapping is just the simple design where you have a cross on a piece of paper, and you have think, feel, say and do, one in each quadrant, where you capture ideas from your observations. We also reviewed problem statements and point of view statements. And in this workshop, we'll go more deeply into the process of question framing. Now, actually, the workshop is made up of mostly case studies for us to view. So I hope you enjoy those and that they will give you a chance to reframe some thinking or think differently, and that would be even better. So remember what Albert Einstein said: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So good old Albert Einstein, he's made us think differently, I think, because we've quoted him often enough over the past few times that we've been together. So let's have a look at case study 1. So this is about the the space shuttle. That's the word I want. The space shuttle Columbia. So on February the 1st, 2003, the Columbia shuttle re-entered Earth's atmosphere, but never touched down. It was destroyed. And unfortunately, all astronauts were killed. And Ronald Lee, who was a design engineer, said, Columbia is part of our history, and we need to remember and learn from it. So Columbia was a space shuttle launched by NASA. It orbited the Earth carrying 7 astronauts. After 16 days in space, it burned up on re-entry in Earth's atmosphere in 2003. All astronauts died on board. But Columbia had completed 25 successful flights. So Columbia is a space shuttle that takes off like an aeroplane and lands like an aeroplane. So it had managed to do that 25 times. So what caused the disaster? So I will tell you the answer, but here we are in a workshop. So what we need to do is look at some tools that we can use to start looking at trying to find the answer. And how do we do it? So who, what, where, when and why. So the who of this is who was on the flight, who organized the flight, what happened, where did it happen, when did it happen, and what was the reason for it. So the who: 7 astronauts were on the shuttle. NASA organized the flight. So what? The space shuttle caught fire and burned up. All the astronauts were killed. Where? It happened in space. When? It happened as the spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere. Why? Searchers found a piece of foam had fallen off the space shuttle's left-hand side on launch. So this might seem pretty simple to you because I've just told you all this and I'm just asking you to answer the 5 W questions. But the point about doing this is what we're trying to do is answer questions at arm's length in terms of observation. What we want is facts, not our judgment. So remember, we've always said we've got to leave behind biases, prejudices, preconceived ideas, and judgment. We have to suspend judgment. Otherwise, we might come up with the wrong problem statement or the wrong solution. So this who, what, where, when and why, yes, simply stated, it's just the facts. So framing the question: how was the accident allowed to happen? Should NASA have aborted the flight? Who was responsible? The space shuttle flight lasted 16 days. Why wasn't Columbia checked during that time? What must NASA do to avoid problems like this in the future? So, as they're framing the questions, what they are learning about the situation is that it was not just an engineering issue. NASA had a rigid management system, an obsession with time, and junior managers who knew about the danger felt unable to report it to senior management. Now, how awful is that? 7 people have died because junior managers didn't feel that they could be honest and talk to senior managers about a problem they thought might happen. Well, anyway, that's a case study from Edmondson. And it's worth reading all the way through. At the end of the slides, you've got the references. So what was the cause? It was determined later the cause of the fatal event happened 2 weeks before, when the shuttle launched 81 seconds into the flight. Insulation foam from an external tank broke off and hit the left wing of the shuttle. At the time, Lee, who was the person who was quoted before, industrial engineering former student and chief of NASA's Office of Emergency Management at the Johnson Space Center, said people thought there was no way that would cause a hole in the wing. So just a small piece of insulation foam that isn't very thick and is very, very light came away from the wing. And everybody thought that because it was, sort of infinitesimal compared with the huge thing of a rocket, that it wouldn't do any damage. But of course, as the rocket's taking off, the power and the speed, anything hitting it would damage it, and that is exactly what happened. So lessons to be learned. So the lessons. Don't just take the first question that comes to mind. Challenge every question. Do you remember we were saying why, when somebody does something? Well, why did they do it like that? When they give you the answer, but why? But why? So this is what you need to be doing. Is there a deeper issue? Consult others to get the right question. Remember, many perspectives, many stakeholders to be asked, and be prepared to reframe the questions throughout the project. So, the challenging of questions. Who is facing the problem? Why? What is the problem they are facing right now? Why? Where does this problem happen? Why? Where does it arise? Why? And is this a problem worth solving? Why? Why is, or what is the answer? So you're really looking for what do you need to know. So keep questioning why. So let's have a look at our first video, and this is the one that I said was quite long. So make yourselves comfortable and get settled in to watch this, and it's worth watching.
Hi everyone. In this short video I will explain how to conduct a framing session. I'm Guido Stompf, professor at In Holland University of Applied Sciences. To start with, let's summarize what a frame is and what a reframing process is. A frame is, in essence, how you view and interpret the world around you. What you see and what you don't see, what you consider good, what you consider bad, what you consider problematic, and what you consider business as usual. The thing is, we all look at the world from our own personal frames, and they may be quite different. And Even when you're a very objective person, you will discover you are always framing the world around you. Now, the most important thing is you cannot think outside of a frame. There's always some frame operating, but you can become aware of your frame and become aware of frames of others. Once you're aware of a frame, you can decide which frames you adopt to explore, for instance, in a design thinking session. And you can also develop new frames, frames that are novel. And that is what a reframing session is all about, to develop alternative frames. In this course, I will introduce 2 ways to develop novel frames. There are many more ways, but these 2 I had good experiences with. The first is a brainstorm session with a group of people. Always get a group of people together. And what you do is you're going to develop new frames and you choose which ones are most inspiring. The easiest way to explain it is by means of an example. Let's imagine that we have a framing session to do something about the loneliness among the elderly. In Western society, the number of elderly people who are feeling extremely lonely is growing rapidly. Now, how can we frame this? The first step is just to gather ideas and problems that people are shouting out. When you ask them, how can we frame this situation? They will shout things like, we need robots, or how about a pet service, or maybe we should have a phone number with professionals, or maybe we should have medication. You can do it in many ways. You can name many different things. Now, the important thing is there's no wrong, there is no right. Just let them shout anything and write it down. Do it in a team so that you get very diverse perspectives on the situation at hand. And regardless whether it's a solution that is named or that's a problem that is named or it's just something which is named that seems relevant, just write it down and do it for some time, like 20 minutes. The second step is that you cluster those ideas and problems and things that are named. You ask people what belongs to each other and how will we name this line of reasoning. So they will put everything together which has something to do with that mobilizing friends and family, for instance, or they categorize everything that has to do with giving some purpose to the everyday life of the elderly. These things, when you group them together and name them, basically is naming the frame that is on top of it, which frames it all, the ideas. Now, some people can take much time thinking about what it is and what should be put together, but do it very intuitively. Do it a little bit loose. It's more important about plausibility, that you say, well, I don't know exactly why, but I feel that these 2 things belong together. They have all something to do with, for instance, relations. And if you can't agree on something, or if you are indecisive yourself, just make 2 clusters. Don't worry about it. It works. Once you have these clusters, it's time to choose. Which one do we think is most inspiring? And actually, which ones are most inspiring? Because you have to choose multiple frames to proceed with. There are many ways to do this voting. You can try to argue your way out, or you can discuss it, but I had really good experience with good old voting. Just give everyone, let's say, 5 votes and let them vote. If they put it all on one frame because they think it's very inspiring, then that frame will become chosen probably, or when 2 people do it like that. But you can also decide to spread your votes across multiple frames. Point is, those frames that resonate, that seem most interesting, that are inspiring, they will pop up automatically, just like that, because everyone is voting. Now, very important, once you end this, say thank you to everyone and say which frames you're going to take along to the next stage when you're going to develop them. Never settle on one, always take at least 2 when you're in a very short time, but preferably pick 3 or 4 or even 5 different frames to explore. Another way of developing frames, a more difficult one, but also a very inspiring one, is by developing metaphors. A metaphor is seeing something as something else. You make a comparison which is inspiring and which helps you to rethink what the situation is you're looking at. The example I have here is that the world has something to do with climate change and stuff like that. The world is shown as melting ice. It's melting away. That is a metaphor. Now, how can a metaphor help you to reframe, to come with a novel frame on a problematic situation? Let's use the same example: loneliness among the elderly. We all know that work offers purpose to life. It gives you some meaning why you are doing things. And also they give people social context. You meet people, you bump into people, you have chats and things like that. So in a way, work is beneficial to reduce the feelings of loneliness. However, the elderly are not working anymore. Now, maybe they're not working, but maybe as a metaphor work, or more specifically, for instance, a garage or a repair shop, could be very beneficial to reframe the issue of the loneliness among the elderly. Because in repair shops or in garages, people bump into each other, and especially the elderly very often have skills that, and time, by the way, that are beneficial if they could use them for others. And the thing is that people will come to them, will have a chat, and they can do things that they are skilled in, and it gives them a sense of purpose. Now, the repair shop is a great metaphor, but you can extend it as well. There are other elderly people who are not so good in repairing things maybe, but they have other skills. And the question is, in this metaphor, is how can we put these skills to use which makes values to other people, so that the other people will come to them. So we discussed two ways to develop novel frames: by means of a brainstorm session, a framing session, or by developing some powerful metaphors. Which I think is most important is that you never stop with having one frame. Always explore several different frames, like the student is doing here. She's presenting two frames next to each other on a poster. And by means of presenting multiple, we can discuss what the impact is of these different frames, of these different perspectives. Once you settled on inspiring frames as a start for your design process that will continue for a long time, you will discover that actually it's just the beginning of a long road, a long winding road with many small steps, because you will frame and reframe often during your design process. It's the nature of design thinking. You frame, you do an experiment, and you reflect. You do an experiment and you reflect. And it's possible that you reflect, you need a new frame. That's the way it is. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in another course.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, because I'm sure that you need it after sitting still for such a long time. Okay, so I'll see you back here in 5 minutes, and we've got a countdown. Okay, now, welcome back. So let's have a look at case study 2, and this is going to be where we consolidate some of our understanding. So let's have a look at hospital treatment. Patients in a heart clinic complained about hospital staff. They said they felt confused, worried, and fearful by the way they were treated. Some said they felt humiliated by medical staff. Not good. And the hospital staff view is our job is to deliver services that restore patients to healthy lives. Efficiency of treatment saves money. So let's do some empathy mapping and framing the question. So remember, empathy mapping is the cross on the piece of paper that gathers what they say, think, do and feel. So heart patients say they are confused, they're afraid, they're worried about their treatment, and they're humiliated by hospital staff. Now, very interestingly, it says they're humiliated by hospital staff. In a survey of the National Health Service here in the UK, it was done a few years ago, but patients said exactly the same thing. And the consultant who was doing the survey of patients in the NHS, the National Health Service, used the word infantilizing. So what he meant was that hospital staff treat all the patients like children. They wake them up at a certain time, they send them to bed at a certain time, they feed them at a certain time, and there's a rigid structure, and you can't do what you want. You're literally treated like a child. And also consultants, some would talk to you as though, if they talked to you, that you didn't know what they were talking about. So, they didn't give you as much information as possible. Things have really, really changed in the NHS in the UK now, but 10 years ago, the result of that survey was quite shocking and brought about a culture change for us. So I'm not surprised that heart patients in this particular hospital are saying confused because they don't understand what's going on, afraid. Oh my God, I could have an operation, I could die, it's my heart. They're worried and they feel humiliated. So this is where your pen and paper come in. I need you to do a problem statement. So please propose a problem statement to resolve these issues. I'm not going to put you into breakout rooms because it hasn't worked very well recently. So just as an individual, if you could take 3 minutes, and I'll put the countdown on for you to write a problem statement. Okay, welcome back. So, the problem statement, I hope you managed to write something down. Remember, it was a very simple thing that we did last week. Well, here's the problem statement that came back with a department manager. And he said, what if the patient's time were viewed as more important than the doctor's? Wow, that's a different way of thinking. And remember, we're always looking for wows, especially in the ideation stage. So here we have a wow of a reframing and looking at the problem. So what was the result? Because when they did do this, the doctors gave patients more time, the costs didn't rise, and improving patients' experience reduced the cost of overnight stays by 50%. Well, that was worth doing. So what about the importance of reframing? So let's have a look at this. Problem framing is an iterative process. Remember, we go backwards and forwards through the process so we get a richer picture. So you need to be able to reframe. So Selig says, being able to question and shift your frame of reference is an important key to enhancing your imagination because it reveals completely different insights. And then Brill says, design thinking will always involve reframing the question or problem you are trying to solve. Design thinking by nature extends the perimeter around a problem, helping us to think of the experience holistically. So what both these quotes are saying to us is we need to shift our focus and turn the problem upside down, around and round, and just change the way we approach it and look at it. So let's have a look at our next video, which is about synthesis, framing, and reframing.
The synthesis, interpret, and frame phase includes activities that are concerned with making sense of the findings from the empathy work, and then defining an actionable problem statement. Your observations, interactions, and stories serve as a source for inspiration, but deriving meaning from these is a very difficult task because people interpret stories in different ways and they have different observations, which can also be interpreted in many different ways. In this phase, each team member is concerned with storytelling and sharing the data and insights that they have gathered from their engagement in the field. The sharing process enables all the team members to interpret the findings of other team members so that these can be processed and condensed to provide an actionable problem statement. So, how to synthesize? Some techniques that you can use include the following. Information clustering and identifying relevant dimensions, where you look for patterns in the data and categorize information or experiences accordingly. You may look for important factors in the context of the problem, like functional, psychological, social, or cultural factors. A second way of interpreting data is to use personas and journey mapping. They are techniques to describe how situations or experiences are different for various user groups. Journey maps, for example, include, the documentation in a day of the life of a person, or a photo documentation of a person's way to work. Another way of interpreting data is to study extreme users. It's a very powerful way to learn about how people at the ends of the spectrum use products or services. Other techniques are finding metaphors or analogies, comparing past and future users, studying surprises, failures, and extreme successes. All these techniques will help you to properly frame the problem. which is often achieved by formulating a so-called problem statement. So what's a problem statement? A problem statement should be actionable. Remember the bias towards action that we talked about earlier. For example, you might frame the problem using a metaphor as, how might we make studying economics like playing a video game? The use of how promotes action towards inquiry and frames the question in a way which guides the development of a solution. So synthesizing means that you are making sense of observed behaviors, emotions and actions, and providing strategic direction, as insights only become valuable once they are actionable. Synthesizing, interpreting and framing and reframing will continue throughout any design thinking process, since a team will gain additional insights with every minute spent working on the problem. So this phase really never really stops. Yet the intention is to create insights that are based on real data that would allow you to use them as a starting point for an ideation and solution generating step. What the tools and techniques of this phase help to achieve is to more specifically describe what the problem really is and who exactly is experiencing it. So it gives clarity about the kind of person involved and the ones affected and the ways in which a problem manifests itself. A well-defined how might we question is a good starting point for thinking about solutions, since that joint formulation of the question itself forces the team to agree on a shared understanding of the scope of the problem space. There might be 20 versions of your how might be question, but formulating each and every one of them will sharpen the focus on what needs to be done next. What's next? Next is creation of ideas about how to solve a well-defined problem.
So, welcome back. So, we have to take a bit of advice here, and it says we need to avoid too much reframing. So, at the beginning, accept your problem statement may be challenged. I mean, that's what we want, because we need to make sure we've got the right problem statement. And you must consider additional stakeholder views. But during the project, accept that stakeholders and their needs may change, and be prepared to consider the implications of new information. So that's you being flexible and adaptable. But when to reframe? If the problem appears more complicated than expected, then you need to reframe. And if it improves the solution for stakeholders, then think about reframing. When not to reframe, just because one person thinks so. You know, some people can have a good argument, some people can knock the status quo out. So because one person keeps intervening without others agreeing, do not reframe. Reframing involves the dynamics for integrating old frames with new frames rather than simply replacing the old with the new. Okay, so we're not doing a replacement, we're doing an integration, and that is when you get good solutions, or you can get good solutions. So let's have a look at our case study 3. So wheelchairs and poverty. Right, so what's the background? 40 million disabled people worldwide use wheelchairs. 70% of them live in rural areas. In emerging markets, many wheelchairs are bought from international manufacturers by NGOs and healthcare charities to help people with disabilities who are living in poverty. The cost paid by NGOs is between $250 and $350 American dollars. Okay, so that's the context. So what's the problem? So if we do some empathy mapping, we find out that wheelchair users in rural areas were asked to share their problems. So the wheelchairs were hard to push along village roads. They were too big for indoors. Imported wheelchairs couldn't be repaired in villages, and to travel more than a mile was very tiring. Now, actually, I can relate to this, and I don't live in a village or a rural area. I live in a city in the UK where there are good roads, decent shops with lifts, but when my mother was ill, she was in a wheelchair. And I remember the very first time I took her out in the wheelchair, I felt like a learner driver. And I mean, she was bumping up and down. I was bumping into things. The chairs and tables in cafes weren't wide enough for us to be able to get through. And I remember taking her to the park the second day we were using the wheelchair. And trying to wheel this or push this wheelchair through a park, it was awful. I was exhausted, and so was she. I think she was more scared actually than exhausted. So it's a real problem. So now it's your turn to design the problem statement. And I'd like you, again, as individuals, to get out your pen and paper and propose a problem statement to resolve these issues. So write down your question and define the problem independent of solutions. Remember, you're only trying to define the problem, not trying to come up with a solution. So I hope you get on better this time because you can use your imagination. So again, I'll give you 3 minutes and I'll do a countdown. So, what was the problem statement that the consultants came up with? It was, how can we design and manufacture a wheelchair that meets rural users' needs and would be affordable? So the key issues: costs approximately $250. It can travel 3 miles a day over varied terrain. It is maneuverable indoors. It's easy and low cost maintenance and repair. So that's what needs to be as core elements of the solution or defining the problem. So what was the result? The leveraged freedom wheelchair. So levers were incorporated in the design. I mean, can you see that picture there? I mean, how would somebody who was wheeling themselves get over terrain like that? But in villages and rural areas, terrain can be like that. So levers to help user get around at different speeds and on different terrains were put into use. The engine built using bicycle parts, so more easily repairable locally, and size and shape made it maneuverable indoors. So I think that was a win-win all round. Okay, so let's have a look at case study 4. So here's a good one for you. A US company started exporting motor cars to India in the mid-1990s. They tried to reduce the price by eliminating some features. For example, they eliminated power windows in the rear doors. The new model's price was right for rich Indians, but rich Indians tended to hire chauffeurs. So what does that mean? That the chauffeur could open the windows in the front with power windows. So the chauffeurs in front could power wind the windows, while the owners in the back could only do it by hand. So the owners were very dissatisfied and expressed their dissatisfaction to the company. Well, you can imagine that as a problem, can't you? So I'm going to leave you with some homework. Yeah, so the homework is going to be, you are the car manufacturer. How will you frame the problem statement? So I'm going to leave you to think about that over the next week, and we'll pick that up next week in our workshop about ideation. So it's a good one. So I hope you have some fun with that. And if you meet some of your fellow students either online or in the campus, please sit down with them and have a group session and see if you can come up with some good problem statements for the design flaw in the Indian design, or the car design for the Indian market. So finally, let's consolidate and have a look at what our key takeaways were for today. We looked at how we frame questions. We were told, don't just take the first question that comes to mind. We need to challenge the question with why, and the 5 who, what, where, when, why. We need to keep saying why in order to unearth any deeper issue. And finally, we need to consult others so that we get the right question, and that's so others so that we get different perspectives. I always say we get a richer picture the more people we ask. So be prepared to reframe the questions throughout the project and know when to stop reframing the question. Okay, so as always, we've got the bibliographic reference list for you, and there were a couple of things that I said were good to look at, and one was the Harvard Business Review about the Challenger, the Space Shuttle Challenger, and what went wrong there. So please have a look at that. And then next week we have tools for generating ideas, and that's our workshop, which followed the lecture that we had on Monday. So thank you very, very much for being with me today and tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the videos, and I hope that perhaps you've had a shift of thinking and some reframing. So take care, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Bye bye.